James Carter wiped the sweat from his brow as he leaned against the wooden fence, his gaze sweeping across the golden fields of Carter Farm. The morning sun bathed the land in warm light, illuminating the rows of corn and the sturdy barn that had stood for over a century. It was a sight of resilience, of history, of family. Then his eyes landed on the bright red envelope nailed to his barn door. His stomach twisted. Not another one. He strode across the dirt path, yanking the paper free. The bold, threatening letters sent a jolt of anger through him. Notice of violation. Your property is in non-compliance with the Homeowners Association regulations. You have 14 days to resolve the following infractions: unauthorized structures on residential property, excessive noise disturbances, livestock, non-compliant vegetation and landscaping. Failure to comply will result in daily fines and potential legal action. James crushed the letter in his fist. This wasn't the first time. Ever since the Oak Crest Homeowners Association took over the area, they had been gunning for his farm. The HOA had come out of nowhere, an organization of smug real estate developers and power-hungry suburbanites who wanted to modernize the neighborhood. They saw his farm as an ugly relic standing in the way of their perfectly curated community. For months, they had sent warnings, fines, threats. He had ignored them all. But this was escalation. James turned, scanning his property. The towering oak tree near his fence had HOA property lines freshly painted in white. His mailbox had been pushed over, its post snapped in half. Someone had even dumped a pile of dead branches into his driveway. An intimidation tactic, subtle yet clear. His jaw tightened. He had built his life here. His grandfather had built his life here. This wasn't just a farm. It was a piece of history. And they wanted to erase it. Not on his watch. A smug smile and a thinly veiled threat. James drove into town that afternoon, his truck rumbling into the gleaming modern HOA office. The glass doors reflected the bright sky, and inside, the place reeked of money and control. At the front desk sat Rebecca Monroe, the HOA's ever-present, ever-fake administrator. She barely looked up from her laptop. "James, another fine, I assume," she said. Chewing gum like this was all just another day at the office. James tossed the crumpled violation notice onto the desk. "You want to tell me what the hell this is?" Rebecca didn't flinch. She picked up the paper, smoothed it out, and scanned it with a slow, deliberate nod. "Looks like a standard compliance issue, Mr. Carter. We've been asking you to bring your property up to code for months." James leaned forward, his voice low. "That farm was here before your HOA, before half of this damn town. Who gave you the right to dictate what happens on my land?" A smooth voice interrupted. "That would be me." James turned as Richard Calloway, the HOA president, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than James made in a year, stepped out of his office. He held a smug, practiced smile, the kind worn by men who had never heard the word no. "Mr. Carter," Calloway said, clasping his hands behind his back, "I was hoping we could have a civilized conversation about this." James folded his arms. "Funny. Your version of civilized includes slapping me with fines for owning a barn." Calloway chuckled as if amused. "James, let's not be dramatic. This is about progress. Oak Crest is evolving. And well, your farm doesn't quite fit in." He motioned toward the letter. "Now, I understand how much your family land means to you, but let's be realistic. You're sitting on valuable property. If you sell now, I can guarantee a generous offer. Enough for you to start fresh somewhere, more suited to your lifestyle." James felt his blood simmer. "And if I don't?" Calloway's smile thinned. "Then I'm afraid these violations will only continue." He shrugged, feigning sympathy. "We'll have no choice but to escalate things legally. And trust me, James, you don't want that kind of fight." James held his gaze. Oh, but he did. He wanted that fight. The first strike. That night, James sat on his porch, watching the sunset bleed across the sky. He could hear his cattle in the distance, the soft rustling of the wind through the cornfields. This was peace, his peace. Then, the roar of an engine. Headlights cut through the darkness. A black SUV slowed as it passed his driveway, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. James tensed, watching as the vehicle paused for a moment, before finally rolling away. A warning. A message. James exhaled slowly, fists tightening. The HOA thought they could scare him into leaving. They had no idea who they were messing with, because James Carter wasn't just going to fight back. He was going to bury them. The night was still, but James Carter couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The SUV from earlier still lingered in his mind. They were watching him, studying him, planning something. But he wasn't about to wait for their next move. The rooster crowed at dawn, and James was already up, walking the perimeter of his land. His boots crunched against the dry dirt as he surveyed his property, checking for any sign of tampering. Then, he saw it. His mailbox had been ripped from the ground. The wooden post lay sprawled across his driveway, snapped in half like a broken bone. The metal box itself had been smashed in with a blunt object, its edges bent and twisted. James clenched his jaw. This wasn't kids messing around. This was personal. As if on cue, a truck rumbled up the road. The driver, a man in a pressed polo and an unmistakable HOA badge pinned to his chest, stepped out, clipboard in hand. His name tag read, Todd Pearson, Compliance Officer. "Morning, Mr. Carter," Todd said with a plastic smile. "Looks like you've got another violation on your hands." James stared at him, incredulous. "You're joking." Todd tapped his clipboard. "Your mailbox isn't standing, sir. That's against community guidelines." James cut him off, his voice low. "Somebody destroyed it." Todd shrugged, unfazed. "That's unfortunate. But per HOA regulations, you need to have a compliant mailbox up by the end of the day, or you'll face a fine." James stepped closer, his eyes burning into Todd's. "And if I don't?" Todd's smile never wavered. "Then we escalate." There it was, the real threat. James took a slow breath, forcing himself not to react. These people wanted him to lose control, wanted him to lash out, so they could paint him as the problem. Not today. Instead, James smirked. "Tell Calloway I'm still not selling." Todd's smile twitched, just slightly. He hadn't expected that. Without another word, he climbed back into his truck and drove off, kicking up dust in his wake. James turned back to his farm, eyes narrowing. If they wanted a war, he'd give them one. The water cut off. By noon, James was in the fields, fixing a broken fence post when he heard a shouting voice from the road. "Hey, James, you need to see this." It was his neighbor, Emma Reyes, jogging toward him with urgency in her step. James dropped his tools and met her by the gate. "What's wrong?" She motioned toward the main water valve at the edge of his property, except something was different. A bright red lock had been clamped onto the shoot-off valve. His water had been cut off. James stormed over, his heart pounding. Sure enough, there was a new sign posted next to it. Notice: water service suspended. Due to zoning non-compliance, access to public utilities has been revoked until further notice. James felt rage coil in his chest, like a snake. This is illegal. Emma crossed her arms, shaking her head. "They're trying to break you, James." No water meant his crops would wither. His livestock would suffer. They were starving him out. And yet James smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. Let them try. The first counterattack. That night, James loaded his shotgun. Not because he planned to use it, not yet, but he knew one thing about people like the HOA. When their intimidation fails, they get desperate. He wasn't going to be caught off guard. Instead, he spent the evening doing his own digging. He pulled out old land records, tracing the ownership of his farm back over 100 years. His grandfather had told him stories about how this land was once a Revolutionary War supply route. Could it still be considered historically significant? James didn't sleep that night. He combed through county archives, searching for any document, any loophole he could use. Then, he found it. A single piece of parchment buried in historical records. A surveyor's map from 1776, marking Carter Farm as an official military supply post. James sat back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face. This wasn't just farmland. This was history. And if he played this right, they could never touch it again. The game changes. The next morning, James drove straight into town. This time, he wasn't going to the HOA office. No, this time he was going to the local historical society. If his farm was recognized as a National Historic Landmark, it would be untouchable. No HOA fines, no development projects, no threats. It would be permanently protected by law. And when that happened, the HOA wouldn't just lose. They would be destroyed. James Carter drove into town with a new fire burning in his chest. The HOA had played their hand. Violations, intimidation, even cutting off his water supply. But they had no idea that he had just found their worst nightmare. The historical records in his passenger seat held the key to not just stopping them, but ending them for good. He parked outside the Oak Crest Historical Society, an old brick building tucked between the modern sprawl of the new developments. Inside, the air smelled of aged paper and dust, the scent of forgotten truths. Behind the desk sat Margaret Holloway, the town's leading historian, an older woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for defending local history like a soldier on a battlefield. She barely looked up as he approached. "If you're another developer looking to demolish something, I suggest you turn around." James smirked. "Actually, I need your help to save something." That got her attention. He placed the 1776 surveyor's map in front of her. Margaret leaned in, adjusting her glasses. Her expression shifted from curiosity to shock. "Where did you find this?" she whispered, her fingers tracing the faded ink. "Buried in county archives," James said. "It proves Carter Farm was a supply route for the Revolutionary Army." Margaret looked up, eyes blazing. "If this is verified, your land could qualify for National Historic Landmark status." James nodded. "That's exactly what I want." Margaret leaned back, considering him. "You do realize what this means, don't you?" "Oh, I do," James said, his smirk widening. "It means the HOA's reign over my land is about to be over." The HOA catches wind. By the time James got back to his farm, the HOA was already sniffing around. A black sedan was parked outside his barn. Standing beside it was Richard Calloway, arms crossed, waiting like a vulture eyeing its next meal. James stepped out of his truck, eyes locked on his unwanted visitor. "You're trespassing, Calloway." Calloway gave a mocking chuckle. "Relax, James. I'm just here to talk." James didn't move. "You've got 1 minute." Calloway sighed dramatically. "Look, I'll be blunt. I know you went to the Historical Society today, and I know exactly what you're trying to pull." James raised an eyebrow. "Trying to pull? You mean uncovering the truth?" Calloway's jaw clenched, but he kept his smile. "James, let's not make this ugly. We can make you a very generous offer, far more than your land is worth. You walk away, we all win." James took a step closer, his voice dangerously low. "You don't seem to understand, Calloway. This isn't about money. This land isn't for sale." Calloway's smile vanished. "Then you leave me no choice," he said, stepping back toward his car. James watched him go, the air thick with tension. As the sedan pulled away, James felt it, the shift. The HOA wasn't trying to pressure him anymore. Now they were preparing for war. The first act of desperation. James spent the night on edge, shotgun resting beside his chair as he watched from his porch. The field stretched out before him, bathed in the silver glow of the moon. Then, A flicker of movement. Out near the barn. James grabbed his rifle and moved fast, boots crunching against the dirt. His pulse pounded as he rounded the corner. And his stomach dropped. Flames. A line of fire raced up the side of his barn, licking at the wooden beams like hungry tongues. Smoke billowed into the night sky, and within seconds, the dry timber caught like kindling. James didn't hesitate. He ran for the hose, only to find the water pressure was gone. They had cut off his dam water. The fire spread faster than he could fight. He barely managed to save the livestock before the entire structure collapsed into an inferno. By the time the fire department arrived, there was nothing left but charred remains. James stood there, fists clenched at his sides, chest rising and falling with controlled fury. And as the flames died down, his rage only burned hotter. The HOA thought they could erase his farm. What they didn't realize, they had just signed their own death warrant. Turning the tables. The next morning, James took pictures of the destruction. He took photos of the burned beams, the graffiti they'd left behind, the dry water hose proving they'd cut him off. Then he posted them. Online. The internet exploded. His post went viral within hours. Thousands of comments flooded in, calling out the HOA's corrupt tactics, the blatant harassment. News stations picked up the story. Politicians started asking questions. Then came the real blow. A state senator reached out, offering to fast-track his land for National Historic Landmark status. With the public watching, with millions of eyes now on the HOA's corruption, Callaway and his cronies were out of moves. James smiled as he read the senator's email. The HOA had spent months trying to destroy him. Now he was about to destroy them. James Carter had always been the kind of man who took things in stride. His farm had survived droughts, floods, and wars. But this was something new. And it wasn't just a fight for his land anymore. It was a war for everything he'd built. After the fire, the world had started paying attention. The photos had gone viral, the hashtags had blown up, and people were rallying behind his cause. But what really tipped the scales was the attention he was getting from higher places. The state senator who had reached out wasn't just any politician. He was a longtime family friend, someone who had grown up in Oak Crest and remembered the history of Carter Farm. And once he saw the evidence, he promised James he would do everything in his power to secure National Historic Landmark status for the property. James couldn't help but smile as he stood outside the remnants of his barn. The flames had turned it to ash, but his spirit had only grown stronger. The battle was no longer about a few cattle or crops. It was about legacy, his family's legacy. And the HOA had no idea what they were up against. The HOA's desperate moves. As news outlets picked up the story, the pressure mounted on the HOA. Callaway had to act quickly. He couldn't afford to let things spiral out of control. His entire vision for Oak Crest was at risk. He called a meeting with the HOA board. "We can't let Carter get away with this," Callaway barked, pacing around the conference room. "He's turned the entire town against us. The state's already involved, and now they're talking about making his farm a historical site." One of the board members, a man with slicked back hair and a pinstripe suit, spoke up. "We can't fight this in the court of public opinion, Richard. We need to hit him where it hurts." Callaway's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?" The man grinned. "There are ways to make life difficult for someone like Carter. If we push the legal angle hard enough, we can drag this out for months. Make it expensive, time-consuming. People like him don't have the resources to win that fight." Callaway's lips curled into a cold smile. "I like the sound of that. Do it." But James wasn't the kind of man who would fold under pressure. The HOA didn't realize that yet. They thought they were dealing with a simple farmer, one who could be driven off with threats and fines. What they didn't know was that James had a secret weapon: the truth. The counterattack begins. James had already taken the first step by securing support from the Historical Society. But now it was time for a broader, more calculated move. He spent the next few days compiling documents, photos, and testimonies. Everything he needed to formally apply for National Historic Landmark status. He reached out to historians, state officials, and even old family friends who had memories of his grandfather's legacy. Then, he made a call to Emily Harrison, a renowned environmental lawyer who had fought battles against shady developers and corporate giants. "I've heard of your fight, James," Emily said when she picked up the phone. "And I think it's time we made this personal." Her voice was sharp, confident, a perfect match for the war James was about to wage. He explained everything to her: the HOA's illegal tactics, their threats, the fire, the water cutoff, and most importantly, their attempt to erase the history of Carter Farm. "We've got a strong case," Emily said, a hint of a smile in her voice. "But what they won't expect is how hard we're going to hit them." James knew it was time to play his trump card. The truth was unstoppable, and with Emily's legal expertise, he now had the means to fight back on all fronts. The first shot fired. The very next day, James and Emily filed a lawsuit against the HOA, accusing them of intentionally sabotaging his property and violating his rights. They filed for emergency injunctions to stop any further action by the HOA, including fines, harassment, or interference with the landmark application. The public outrage against the HOA grew as the story of the lawsuit spread. The media went into overdrive, exposing not just the HOA's petty vendettas, but also their shady practices. Local businesses, community leaders, and even former residents who had left Oak Crest due to the HOA's oppressive tactics started speaking out, offering their support to James. It was no longer just about one man's fight. It was about taking down an entire corporate regime that had been preying on their town for too long. And with each passing day, the HOA board members grew more and more agitated. But they had no idea what was coming. A ticking clock. James had one final card to play. After the legal battle was underway, the National Register of Historic Places fast-tracked their review of Carter Farm's application. This meant that in a matter of weeks, the farm could be officially declared a National Historic Landmark, making it completely immune to development and HOA interference. Time was running out for the HOA. As the tension built, so did the stakes. James sat on the porch of his farm, staring out at the now quiet fields, a sense of calm settling over him. He'd done everything he could to fight back, and now the victory was within his reach. The next move was his, and it would be the final one. James Carter felt the weight of the moment press against his chest. The battle had been fierce, but now the endgame was in sight. He stood at the edge of the field, his eyes scanning the horizon, where dark storm clouds were gathering overhead. There was something symbolic about the impending storm, something that felt right. The calm before the hurricane, the quiet before the final, decisive strike. For weeks now, his lawyer Emily Harrison had been pounding the courts, gathering witness testimonies, and preparing every shred of evidence to ensure that the HOA could never touch Carter Farm again. The National Historic Landmark application was nearly complete, and once it was approved, the farm would be untouchable by the HOA's clutches. But James knew the HOA wasn't going down without a fight. They were cornered now. Their own greed and corruption had left them with no way out. They couldn't afford to lose this. As the storm clouds loomed closer, James got a call from Emily. Her voice was low, tense. "We need to meet. There's a new development. The HOA is about to pull something big." The hairs on the back of James's neck stood on end. "What do you mean? What are they planning?" "They're trying to buy out key local officials. I've caught wind of it. They know the landmark status is coming, and they'll do anything to stop it." James's eyes darkened. The HOA wasn't just a nuisance anymore. They were a full-blown threat to everything he had fought for. "Then we'll stop them first," James said, determination in his voice. "I'm not going down without exposing their dirty tricks." A desperate attempt. It didn't take long for the HOA's desperation to make itself known. The very next day, a man in a sharp suit showed up at James's door. He was Agent Thomas Brooks, a representative from a corporate lobbying firm hired by the HOA to do their dirty work. "Mr. Carter," Agent Brooks began with a disarmingly friendly tone, "I'm here to discuss a very serious matter. The HOA is prepared to offer you a significant sum to sell your property and avoid further legal complications." James narrowed his eyes, instinctively stepping back, not letting the man inside. "Is that so? What exactly is the HOA offering?" The agent smiled, pulling out a thick envelope. "Let's just say the offer is more than enough for you to walk away. We can avoid any more trouble. You keep your farm intact for now. And we can prevent this from escalating into something you'll regret." James's pulse quickened. He already knew what this was: bribery, plain and simple. They didn't want him to fight. They wanted him to sell out. But the look on James's face hardened into a mask of determination. "I'm not interested in your money. You can tell your clients that Carter Farm isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." Agent Brooks's smile faltered. He was expecting a different answer, a weak one, the kind that could be bought. But James was no fool. "Well, Mr. Carter," Agent Brooks said, his tone now cold, "we'll see if your resolve holds when we escalate things further." Without another word, the agent turned and left, but the threats had been made clear. The HOA wasn't giving up. The ticking clock winds down. As James prepared for the coming storm, both literal and figurative, he couldn't help but feel a wave of grim satisfaction. The time for negotiation was over. He wasn't just fighting for his farm anymore. He was fighting to protect the future of everything that came before him. His grandfather's legacy, his father's sweat and blood. He'd already reached out to the press, letting them know about the bribery attempt and the HOA's underhanded tactics. He was about to make them pay for every underhanded move they had ever made. And then, the storm hit. The heavy winds whipped through the trees, as if nature itself was gearing up for the battle. James turned to see Emily pull up in her truck. She slammed the door shut and jogged up the porch steps, her expression grim. "We've got a window," Emily said breathlessly. "The National Historic Landmark application is moving forward, but we need to hit them hard. If we're going to get the HOA out of this picture, we need to expose them for everything they've done. If we don't move fast, they'll still try to fight back." James nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then let's make sure they don't have time to fight." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. The line picked up almost immediately. "Emily," the voice on the other end of the line said. It was Senator Alan Pierce, the same senator who had pledged to fast-track his application for historical status. "I've just received word that the opposition is using questionable methods to influence key people involved in the application. You've got all the evidence, right?" "We do," Emily replied, her voice filled with resolve. "And we're about to make it public." Senator Pierce paused for a moment. "Then we'll expose them. It's time to end this once and for all." James could feel the storm picking up now, both in the sky and inside of him. The final confrontation was inevitable. He had made his decision, and he wasn't backing down. The fight was far from over, but he was about to deliver the final blow. The clock was ticking. The storm had broken loose. Sheets of rain slammed against the windows of James Carter's farmhouse as the wind howled outside like a wild beast. But inside, the tension was palpable. Every second that ticked by felt like the beat of a war drum, announcing the end of the HOA's stranglehold on Oak Crest. James stood by the window, his eyes narrowed. The stakes had never been higher. As the wind howled and thunder rumbled in the distance, he knew this wasn't just a fight for his farm anymore. It was a fight for the future of the land. For every resident who had ever been bullied by the HOA's corrupt grip. And it was a fight James was determined to win. The press had gotten wind of the bribery attempt, and it had exploded. News outlets were now reporting on the HOA's underhanded dealings, bringing their questionable practices to light. James had carefully orchestrated every move, ensuring that the public would see the HOA for what they really were, a predatory force, thriving on fear and manipulation. But the real surprise was yet to come. The clock was ticking. James had made his final move. And now, it was time to watch the dominoes fall. The betrayal exposed. Emily Harrison walked in, the intensity in her eyes matching the firestorm that had been brewing outside. "We've got everything we need," she said, slamming a stack of papers onto the kitchen table. James took a deep breath. "Are you sure? The evidence has to be airtight." Emily smiled grimly. "I've already handed it over to the press. The public's going to see just how deep the HOA's corruption runs. Their last-ditch efforts to buy out local officials. We've got the email chain, the bank transfers, and even photos of the meetings where they tried to manipulate the system. This is it, James, the final blow." As she spoke, James felt the weight of the moment settle on him. Everything had led to this. The bribery, the fire, the lies. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and now, there was no going back. Emily picked up her phone. "I'm hitting send. This story goes live in the next 5 minutes. Get ready." James watched as she clicked the button, and immediately, the phone rang. It was a reporter, already asking questions about the evidence that had just been released. The floodgates were open. Within hours, the entire town was buzzing. The social media firestorm that followed was a spectacle in itself. People were sharing their own stories of HOA oppression, tagging their local politicians, and rallying behind James's fight. And then came the next blow, the official statement from the National Historic Preservation Board. The farm was being fast-tracked for landmark status, and they had already begun reviewing the application in full. The HOA's nightmare was now a public spectacle, and their every move was being watched. The final act of defiance. It was happening. The very thing the HOA had worked so hard to prevent was now set in motion, and they were powerless to stop it. But James knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. They still had their lawyers, their connections, and their ability to drag things out in the courts. They were like a cornered animal, and they'd fight back in any way they could. James was prepared for that. He'd been preparing for this moment for years. Then, out of nowhere, came a call from Senator Pierce. His voice was strained, and for the first time in weeks, there was a hint of urgency in his tone. "James, I need you to listen closely. The HOA is planning a last-ditch move. I'd just gotten word that they're going to challenge your landmark status in court." James felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't just some simple legal maneuver. It was a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. The HOA was out of options, and this was their one shot to hold on to what little power they had left. "I don't care what they tried," James said, his voice unwavering. "We have them cornered. They can delay it all they want, but they're already losing. I've already got the people behind me. They'll never win this fight." Senator Pierce's voice softened. "I know, James, but I just wanted you to know they're not backing down. So prepare for a legal battle. We're going to need to outmaneuver them at every turn." James smiled grimly. Bring it on. The storm outside had reached its peak. The wind was howling, the rain coming down in torrents, and James could feel the storm inside him. This wasn't just about his farm anymore. It was about everyone the HOA had ever crushed beneath their boot. He wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The calm before the storm. The next morning, James sat at his desk, his hand resting on the stack of documents that contained his final move. The court challenge was inevitable. But the truth was, the public pressure now mounted so high that the HOA would have to think twice about pushing this any further. James knew the tipping point was coming. The landmark status would be approved. The fight would end, but only after one last final act of defiance from the HOA. And James was ready. This storm had been a long time coming. And now, the end was within his reach. The air was thick with tension as James Carter stood before the massive courtroom doors. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. This was the final battle. The storm that had raged for months had reached its peak, and now it was time to make the final move. Every step he took towards the courtroom felt like a strike of lightning. He could hear the rumbles of the legal battle that had been set in motion, feel the echoes of everything he had fought for. His farm, his family's legacy, the town of Oak Crest, they all hung in the balance. He wasn't just fighting for land anymore. This was a stand against tyranny, against a group of people who thought they could take anything they wanted without consequence, against an institution that had abused its power for far too long. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Lawyers in sharp suits sat at the tables, flipping through documents as whispers of the high-profile case buzzed through the air. The reporters, all eyes on James, their cameras poised, were ready to capture every moment of this monumental showdown. James stepped up to the defendant's seat, his eyes fixed on the opposing side. The HOA's legal team, led by a slick, silver-tongued lawyer named Richard Calloway, was ready to fight tooth and nail. James could see the smug look on Calloway's face, a man who had spent years manipulating people for personal gain. But James wasn't intimidated. "They've pushed me to the edge," James thought, "and now it's time for them to face the consequences." The battle unfolds. The courtroom fell silent as the judge entered, the gavel striking down with a resounding thud. It was time. James's lawyer, Emily Harrison, stood first, confidently walking to the front of the room. She was sharp, focused, her presence filling the space like a blade poised for action. "Your Honor," Emily began, her voice firm, "we are here today because one man's legacy has been attacked, his land has been threatened, and the very history of this town has been subjected to an illegal campaign of manipulation. The Carter Farm is not just land. It is a symbol of everything this community holds dear." Emily's words hung in the air, her tone striking a chord with everyone in the room. She was laying the groundwork. But now, it was James's turn. James stood and made his way to the stand. As he took his seat, the cameras flashed, the noise of the room growing louder with anticipation. His heart raced, but his resolve was solid. He turned to face the judge, his voice steady. "I'm here today because this farm is more than just property. This is my family's history. This land has been in my blood for generations. I have fought for this place with everything I have, and I will not let anyone erase it." The judge, an older man with a lined face and weary eyes, looked up from his notes. His expression softened, perhaps understanding that this wasn't just a legal case, it was a battle for the soul of the town itself. James continued, "The HOA has tried to destroy what we've built. They have tried to manipulate officials, intimidate the community, and destroy my family's history. I've fought back not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been forced to cower under their rule." The room was silent. For the first time in months, James could feel the shift in the air. The tide was turning. And then it was Calloway's turn. The HOA lawyer stood with all the arrogance of someone who thought they were invincible. He flashed a smile that could melt steel. "Your Honor," Calloway began, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "what we're dealing with here is a farm, a piece of land in the middle of nowhere. The application for historic status is nothing more than a desperate attempt to hold on to property that should have been developed long ago. The HOA's decision to revoke this farm's zoning was justified. The community does not want this relic of the past taking up valuable space." His words felt like venom, but they weren't enough to sway the tide. Calloway could sense it too. The momentum had shifted. The moment of truth. As the trial progressed, James's team unveiled the evidence, the documents that exposed the HOA's bribery attempts, the leaked emails, the secret meetings where they'd plotted to strip away his land's legacy. The courtroom was shocked as each piece of evidence hit the table, revealing the depths of the HOA's corruption. The whispers among the spectators grew louder, the crowd shifting against the HOA's claims. The public had already made up their mind. The HOA had become the villain in this story. And just as Calloway tried to salvage the case with more legal jargon and feigned innocence, James's lawyer dropped the bombshell. A videotape, a secretly recorded conversation with one of the HOA members, detailing their plans to suppress the truth about Carter Farm's historical significance. The smoking gun that would prove their malice beyond a shadow of a doubt. The courtroom erupted. Calloway's face went pale as the weight of the evidence came crashing down around him. James could see it, his opponent's confidence crumbling. The judge didn't even need to deliberate long. After hearing the final arguments, he banged his gavel once more. The decision was made. I rule in favor of James Carter. The Carter Farm will be officially granted National Historic Landmark status. The HOA's actions were illegal, and they will be held accountable for their interference. James's heart leaped. The storm was over. He had won. The courtroom broke into applause, and as James turned to face Emily, he knew it wasn't just a personal victory. This was a victory for the people of Oak Crest, for every single person who had been oppressed by the HOA's greed. And just as the storm outside began to calm, James Carter realized this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new era for his family, his farm, and his community. The battle for justice had been won, but the war for freedom had just begun. The courtroom erupted into chaos, the gavel's final strike ringing in the air like a death knell for the HOA's reign of terror. James Carter stood there, motionless for a moment, his mind racing to catch up with the overwhelming weight of the victory. For so long, he had fought through threats, legal battles, and the dark forces of the HOA. But now, as the room buzzed with applause and disbelief, he realized something deeper. This wasn't just about saving his farm. It was about setting a precedent. The storm outside had finally relented, but the winds had not yet died. They still howled with an eerie power. But this time, James felt no fear. It was as if the very elements had rallied behind him, a sign that nature itself had aligned with his cause. Emily Harrison was beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper in the cacophony of cheers. "You did it, James. We did it." But James wasn't smiling. Not yet. His eyes were fixed ahead, as if the battle was still ongoing. "This is just the beginning." His voice was steady, filled with a quiet but undeniable resolve. As the courtroom began to empty, James felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him. The town of Oak Crest had been watching, and now they saw him not just as a farmer, but as a symbol of defiance, of resistance. He had shown them that one man, armed with the truth, could take down the most powerful forces that sought to crush the heart of a community. And for the first time in his life, James realized something profound. He wasn't alone. The fallout, the victory was swift, but the aftermath was just as intense. The media flooded Oak Crest, swarming James's property with cameras, reporters, and interviews. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was a national story. People across the country were rallying behind James's stand against corruption, and they weren't just sitting on the sidelines. Support poured in. Locals came to the farm in droves, bringing with them gifts, food, and supplies. Many of them had been silent victims of the HOA's tyranny. Now, they wanted to join the fight. The farm became a symbol of what could happen when people stood together. Every corner of Oak Crest buzzed with a renewed sense of pride. The community was alive, stronger than ever before, and they knew they had James to thank for it. But there were rumblings in the distance. The HOA, reeling from their loss, wasn't going down quietly. Their board members began to retreat into their shadowy networks, plotting ways to recover from their catastrophic failure. They had lost, but they weren't giving up their grip on power without a fight. Yet, for the first time in years, James felt unshakable. A new battle brews. Just days after the ruling, James was called back to the town hall. The atmosphere was different now, charged, as if the entire town was holding its breath. The local government, long in the pockets of the HOA, was now faced with a reckoning. The people had seen the truth, and they weren't willing to return to the shadows. At the meeting, an unexpected voice rose from the crowd. A man named David Morris, a former city councilman who had watched Oakcrest languish under the HOA's grip for far too long. His voice carried authority, his words filled with passion. It's time to reclaim our town, our homes, our lives. The battle for Carter Farm was just one victory. If we allow the HOA to crawl back into power, we will lose everything we've worked for. We must take a stand now, once and for all. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices unified in determination. James could see it in their eyes. They were ready to fight. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about everyone who had been silenced by the HOA's iron fist. Emily stepped forward, her voice calm but piercing. We have a chance now to reshape the future of Oakcrest, to take back what was stolen from us. The HOA will fight back. They will try to discredit us, to tear us apart. But we know the truth. We've seen their corruption. James stood, his heart pounding. The next steps would be difficult. The HOA wasn't done. But now, they had something they hadn't had before. A voice. The community had spoken, and the world had listened. It was time to turn the tide for good. A promise for tomorrow. As the meeting broke up, James found himself standing outside, staring at the vast expanse of his land, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. The wind, once wild and uncontrolled, now whispered through the tall grass in a way that seemed almost peaceful. The battle had been won, but there was more to do. James was no longer fighting alone. The people of Oakcrest, once cowed by fear and intimidation, were now rising up, united, unyielding. And James, he was no longer just the farmer. He was the leader of a movement. We've won the war, he thought, as the last of the daylight faded, but the battle for freedom is just beginning. Behind him, the Carter Farm stood tall, a beacon of resilience in the fading light. And in the distance, James could already hear the voices of his community rising together, ready to face whatever storm might come. For they knew, together, they were unstoppable.